So let me start by asking, anyone here been to SeaWorld before? SeaWorld, it's just about everybody. So what happens when you go to the dolphin show with the great big tank in front of you, or the Shamu show with the great big killer whale, and you want to take a seat? You typically take a seat towards the front or towards the back, and why? Towards back. Towards back. Because you don't want to get wet. There's a splash zone. There are those little warning signs everywhere that say, stay back unless you want to get wet. That's the splash zone. And this is something really interesting about that splash zone. My daughter just graduated from seminary, and her seminary teacher was conducting a study about the number of her students who were very engaged in class, correlated to how close they sat towards the front of the room. And she found that those that were more engaged tended to sit closer to the front. And she asked one of the students in the back what the value was of sitting towards the front of the room. And that student said, well, it's like being in the spiritual splash zone. And isn't that awesome? Isn't that where we want our students to be? We want our students to be in that spiritual splash zone. Now we're teaching online courses, so this is all digital, so it's really how we perceive our students' engagement and efforts. But we can usually tell in our classes who those students are who would typically sit in front of our class and those who would sit further in the back. And so I think the ultimate goal then is to help encourage our students and help them engage in a way that enables them to benefit from that spiritual splash zone opportunity or blessing. And one of the ways that they can get motivated and encouraged is to help share with them some of the wonderful benefits and blessings we've received through technological blessings over time. And one of those benefits that we've received is in the form of programmatical development with inner and outer loops. So what's interesting is in object-oriented programming, you can create an overall game loop. And within that game loop, you can have smaller functional constructs. Within those constructs, you can set incremental loops. And the way these incremental loops is that you have, or the way they work is that you have an outer loop, and then you have an inner loop. And you can have this set to increment by, say, up to 9, and then have this one set to 9. So what you could say is, this one will not increment by 1, a count of 1, until this is incremented a count of 9. Once this has gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, n, being 9, then this one will increment by 1. And then it'll come back up here to the inner loop, and it'll say, let's go through it all again, and then let's increment this one to 2. Now you can keep doing this. You can go inner, you can go inner, you can go inner, you can go inner, and it will wait until this is incremented. Then this will increment by 1, and when this reaches a certain point, does that make sense so far? We have these loops. Where did this come from? Does anybody know? This is actually really interesting stuff. Where this came from was Orson Pratt and William Clayton. William Clayton at the time, and we probably know him best from the hymn Come Come Ye Saints, he had a dilemma. He had to take a long trek, and he wanted to count the miles on his wagon. And he thought, you know, if I count the number of revolutions of my wagon wheel, then I can essentially figure out how long the distance is for 1 mile. He figured out that 360 revolutions is equivalent to 1 mile. What he did was he took a red flag and he put it on the wheel, and he watched over and counted 360 times for every mile to get a gauge of his distance. If you can imagine how difficult that would be over time, your head turned over the side of your wagon, watching that go around and around. He had to come up with a better solution because they were going to go from Missouri to Utah. Anybody know the distance from Missouri to Utah? 1,275 miles, give or take. If you were to times that, multiply that by 360 revolutions for every mile, that's 475,000 counts. So imagine, you know, that count system. So what he did, with the help of Orson, because Orson was a mathematician, and so this really worked out very well between the two of them. You had a great innovator, tremendous out-of-the-box thinker, and you had Orson, who was a mathematician, who could help kind of figure this out. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to create a series of gears that would enable them to conduct the count. So if you have your wagon wheel, and actually it's better if I take the wagon wheel and draw it at an angle instead. there we go. I'll give it that center point. If you were to make a little notch on there, which would be essentially like that red flag, and you had a nice little gear here that had little joints that stuck out, and that connected to a spindle that had a nice little, like in a barber shop, you see it kind of swirly, and as it moves up, kind of swirls, kind of moves up. That would be attached, that'd be fixed to a gear that would have 60 teeth to it. And those 60 teeth were marked with one major point being one full revolution across. This one would enable them to count 1 mile. And so what it would do is it would count 360 loops or revolutions for one full turn of this very large inner loop. And this would then be attached to a smaller one that would be your outer loop. So every time this incremented around once, based on the 360 movements or revolutions, this would start its count slowly around until this reached 60. When this reached 60 for its inner loop, this would then increment by 1. So this was tens of miles, and this was ones of miles. And about halfway across the journey, Brigham Young recognized the value of being able to count the distance, because they recognize seasons change and it becomes more difficult with adverse weather conditions to get across, and they have to be able to time it just right for the future saints who would come across. But they wanted to be able to do it based on the distance. And so they created yet another one that would let them do in the hundreds. Where did this all lead? Well, it was called a roadometer. Take out the R, the A, and the D, you've got odometer. And so today's odometers are all from early pioneer technology, which is just absolutely fascinating, because it's now not just in an odometer that has gears, it's now in a programmatic digital technological environment that enables us to program logic against these inner and outer loops, so that we can create video gaming, so that we can create functional applications in business and finance and in various industries. And I do want to touch on video gaming technology real quick, because the Saints loved games. And even though they had to take this long 1,200-mile trek from Missouri to Utah, they worked really hard, but they also played. And I had this beautiful picture I wanted to show you, where it showed them somewhere around Iowa, and there was a beautiful river that they were having to cross. And on one side, you can see all the kids are helping, the families, they're carrying certain stuff across, they're working really hard with their moms and dads. But on the other side, they're drying off, they're resting in the grass, they're playing tag, and the bottom line was that there was a work-life balance. The work in it was, we're going west. The life balance was, we're kids, let's play. And the parents would take a little bit of time with their kids while they play. So Joseph Smith's favorite game, does anybody know what his favorite game was? Stick pulling. He loved that stick pulling game. So gaming was very much in the hearts and minds of the early pioneer saints. And let's fast forward now to 1968, 69. A young man by the name of Nolan Bushnell is going to Utah State University. He's working at Lagoon. He's fascinated by gaming technology. Nothing's on screen yet. Everything's done by circuit boards. And at Utah State University, they were working on this new program called Space Wars. And there's kind of a fun little side note about this, is that George Lucas wanted to call Star Wars Space Wars, but USU already had Space Wars kind of patented, so he went and did Star Wars instead, because anyways, okay, fun influence. But here Nolan is kind of going through the rounds here, learning more about Space Wars, and he and his cohort, I can't remember his name just off the top of my head, but they got together and they wanted to form a company of their own. But the name they wanted, which don't even ask me to pronounce, it was like Sissigija or Sissigija, was taken by a candle maker commune. And so instead, he went with the term Atari. And Atari comes from the term Ataru, which is Japanese. It comes from his absolute favorite game of all time. It's a classic Japanese game called Go. And Ataru meant that you basically had your opponent in check, the equivalent of check. And they went with that name and built out this not just this wonderful company with all these wonderful classic video games like Pac-Man and Super Breakout that coincidentally was created by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who founded Apple, but basically launched the video game industry as we know it today. That all came from the minds of an early pioneering revolution of being able to put families first and being able to have that work-life balance. And here's kind of a fun side note also about Bushnell. Now, later in his life, he stopped practicing Mormonism. And what's interesting is about the time he made that decision to stop practicing, he started making some really interesting mistakes in his career. And one of the biggest mistakes that he made was when he was approached by Steve Jobs in 1976 and was told that Steve, I were about to form a company called Apple. And for $50,000, would Nolan want to be involved in this for 1/3 of the company? Of course, in his brightness, without the Holy Ghost present, he said no. And now we're talking about close to $1 trillion valued organization that he's completely missed out. And maybe that's a good thing for him as well and his family. But again, another wonderful example of a pioneering movement that is very engaging from a technology perspective. The third one, when the pioneers got to the Salt Lake Valley, they didn't have a newspaper. They didn't have a social means to keep up with the news and what was going on around the world, and they needed a way to communicate between leaders. They needed a way for them to communicate between communities. The community started building outwards from the Salt Lake Temple grounds where Brigham Young said, this is where we're going to put the temple. And so they created Deseret News. And in 1950, Deseret News launched its first paper. And its goal was to become a voice for the community and to provide news and an outlet for leaders, both state and religious, which were kind of blended at that time, to be able to communicate with one another. And this newspaper did very well. Thanks to technology today, the church has recognized that that newspaper represented a social medium, a social media outlet to enable people to share common beliefs and be able to learn from one another and to be able to build off of that belief system and grow their testimonies. And now the church is using social media like never before. They've embraced it in such an incredible way. I had a slide where I would have shown you that there were some 300 plus different social media icons representing various companies and tools where you could get the word out, from Instagram to Pinterest, from Twitter to Facebook, and so on. And so I have blogs and whatnot. And the church is really embracing this. They've conducted a study where it's an active study where they had 3,600 missionaries in 30 different missions in Japan and the United States use specially configured mini iPads or iPad minis. And this was to help them proselytize using online tactics, given that when they go tracting, a lot of people just aren't available. A lot of people tend to, they tend to work more, they tend to be away from home more, and so this would enable us to get more front and center with the local communities at a social level. And it's done extremely well. It's done so well that they're looking at expanding this across 40+% of all missionaries who are currently serving. It's 85,000 missionaries that are currently serving today, approximately. And this movement was actually, I want to say forecasted, but that's the wrong word. It was prophesied that this would come to pass. Both Elder Bednar made mention of how the church missionary efforts would lead to using social media mediums at an accelerated pace. And much earlier on, in 1981, all these great quotes from all these wonderful leaders in the church. One of them was from President Hinckley, where he had mentioned that that with technical innovation, the ability to reach the entire world would be available in the palm of your hand. Sounds like a social media device to me, if ever I heard one, a mobile device. And it's exciting, it's exhilarating to see this kind of growth. Now, one other thing to point out here is that we're not the only church that feels this way. There's a reason for that. If you look at a study of Christian millennials worldwide, you would find that 4 out of 7 tend to use an online method from a mobile device or a laptop or a desktop system in order to learn more about their faith. And not just learn more about their faith, but 1/3 of those polled use it to learn about other faiths as well. 54% of them use it to read their scriptures online. 1/3 of that 54% use it to read the scriptures of other faiths as well, including the Book of Mormon. And if you look at different social outlets like Facebook and Pinterest, you look at the channels that the church has begun to embrace, and you look at the number of followers, the number of tweets, retweets. A really fun one is if you go, and this actually annoys my wife to no end, if you go on a conference day onto Twitter and you watch the hashtag they put on there, I guarantee you can't keep up with it. You'll scroll down every second and there'll be like 30, 50, 60 different posts all at once. And you're trying to keep it, I'm trying to watch it. My wife's like, will you please pay attention to conference? Like, I'm watching conference right now. And it's the funnest thing to watch because this is a worldwide phenomenon. And it's happening at such a rapid pace. And it's a brilliant position for the church to embrace. But it's also based on prophecy. It's also based on an understanding of how we can reach a worldwide population, a highly distributed population, a highly culturally diverse population, and do so through a technological means that we can not only embrace, but we can position our students to be a part of. Elder Bednar made mention that our students are in a place now in their lives where they're very proficient, much more so than the X generation and the generation before that. I mean, they are very proficient with technology, and he feels that there's a reason for that. He feels that one of the biggest reasons that they're proficient with technology is that it will enable them to help Zion come to pass, to build out the framework of our beliefs so that everyone will have an opportunity to learn more about where they came from, why we're here, and where we're going when it's all over. And this is such a wonderful witness to me of the power of technology in our lives today, especially in an environment where I have the blessing of being able to teach a computer information technology course for BYU-Y. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to sit with students and share with them all of these wonderful outcomes and all these wonderful ways that the church is embracing technology and innovation. And it's fun to hear their thoughts as well, because they want to push it forward even that much more further. And they have all kinds of great ideas on how that can be done. And as they learn how to embrace technological innovation, they also learn how to join that movement, how to not just be a participant observer, but how to be a participant leader, how they can actually embrace and lead as a missionary, as a post-missionary, moving into their family relationships and their careers, where technology is likely going to represent a major part of their career path, regardless of what industry or vertical they go into. And it's very exciting to see the church embrace technology as well as our student body. Has anyone had any experience with their students and working to move them towards that spiritual splash zone by talking about fostered educational or fostered technological advancement in education? Sorry for making that a really big question, but basically, have you talked to your students about technology? And how does that go? Are they receptive? Do they embrace the discussion? Are they engaged? What I found in my class is I've had the opportunity to ask questions about how the church positions technology, and as I've shown them perspective based on some of the early pioneer technological influences, it's been interesting to hear some of their reactions to many of these advancements. One of our students was mentioning how, look at Deseret News. There's the Salt Lake Tribune, and that's a top competitor for them on the Wasatch Front. But Deseret News, per a recent Pew Research study in 2012, was listed as the fastest growing news portal site in the United States. That's significant. That says a lot. You're going up against USA Today. You're going up against New York Times, LA Times, Tribune. I mean, there's all these different large-scale organizations that you're putting this Pulitzer Prize-winning, smaller regional, 100-plus-year-old newspaper against. And the big question was, how? How did they accomplish that? And the answer was through technology. It was done through algorithmic logic. It was done looking, reverse engineering Google's ranking algorithm. It was done creating content that was relevant, that was fresh, that was engaging. It was done looking at long tail versus short tail movement in how key terms rank and trend over time for both breaking news stories that have a very short lifetime value, approximately 24 hours, to stories that are more like evergreen content where they can persist for years and years. For instance, how to change a tire. That could just go on and on, versus somebody's hurt in a recent car crash. You know, depending on who was potentially hurt and what kind of vehicle was involved in what intersection, perhaps there might be an extension of the lifetime value there. But a story like that typically won't drive enough traffic to gain that kind of momentum and ranking. However, more evergreen content where you focus on correlating seed terms, a term like how to, with related terms that we mathematically predict will move and trend in Google rankings based on other influencers and factors, enabled Deseret News to identify the best types of stories to go after with that evergreen focus, and enable them to both, well, it enabled them to reach that point where they were looked at as one of the fastest growing in the United States, because it had such tremendous reach and visibility in the ranking scales. Now, KSL is another one that fell into that same category. KSL is looked at as the top trafficked broadcast media website in the United States. That's over CNN, it's over MSNBC, that's over several big segments, and it's the same story all over again. They used technology. And this technology, if you were to ask Dr. Gilbert, would state that it was mostly due to technological disruptive innovation. Thinking outside of the box and being nimble and flexible enough to be able to move on it and push changes to production in a very fast-to-market approach that enabled you to overcome the barriers that are challenged, or barriers that are experienced as a challenge by larger institutions of scale. Okay. Again, I apologize. I have so many wonderful slides I want to show you. Let's talk about future technology real quick before. One of the really fascinating events is Oculus, being in the Rift, 360-degree full immersion. This means taking a headset, placing this headset on your head, and feeling as though you're actually there in that space. Now, if you're to play a PlayStation or an Xbox, and you're in a video game, when you want to look around, you take the little joystick and you thumb up to the side, and the eagle kind of shows, so you get some perspective. It's, okay, there's a 10-story building, I'm on the bottom floor, I guess it's kind of hot. With Oculus, when you go to look up, the building is stationary. The building has a foundation. It has a tangible, real value in a digital space, so that when you look up, you get the sensation you are literally looking up 10 stories. Climb those stairs and look back down, and your body has a hard time telling the difference. Start the fall, and your body cannot tell the difference of whether or not you're really falling. And so that sensation of losing your breath and actually falling is a very real thing. That's very interesting. Now, Microsoft's taking a different approach there. Microsoft is coming up with what's called HoloLens. And their focus is more on augmented reality, AR reality, where you put the headset on. Now, this is more like a Geordi from Star Trek, where he can see everything just like we can see for the most part, except it's hyper blended with digital real estate. So in this page, in this instance with Microsoft HoloLens, when you place on the headset, you'll see the room as if it's here, But you'll have the option of opening up 100-inch screens wherever you want, or resize them however you want them to fit. Play video games on the space. So anybody familiar with Minecraft? You want to play Minecraft on the desk right here in front of you. You'd see the desk, and when you start the game up, the game would happen to absorb a certain space as if it were really there. And you get the full 360-degree view by walking all around this. Now, where I'm kind of excited to see is how the church will embrace these future technologies, these opportunities to not just proselytize, but to sit down in one-on-one settings for people who aren't even there. The opportunity to sit down in a virtual environment, look them in the eyes, bear testimony and witness of the divinity of Jesus Christ, to express to them what our feelings are about the gospel today, and share with them how we feel about what the church has done for us in our lives. And I look forward to these many opportunities to share with students not only what types of technologies are trending and those that are just around the corner, but ways that students can start thinking through and wrap their heads around how they can apply those technologies to help advance the cause of Zion and to help them be able to draw closer to our Heavenly Father and share that with others who are lost sheep. I'm grateful for my membership in the church. I'm grateful for my opportunity to share some of this information with you. Again, with my apologies that this presentation is not going quite as planned. And I'll talk with administrators on the tech side to see if I can still get my slides posted. And I would encourage you to please look through them when you have an opportunity to. There's a lot more granularity there than my little mind can absorb on my own. And thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions for me, I'm more than happy to be able to take those for the remaining few minutes.